Nice to meet you, Dr. Lippman. It's an honor to be chatting with you. We're here at the Media Lab, and you have a long history of working in media, all the way from 1990s and so on, where you were working on MPEG codec and some of the digital TV sort of revolution, I would say. And you're really looking into the future of media, all the way from TV to headset to virtual reality. What is the future that you see now?
The future is in so many different domains that it's really, really hard to predict that, which is why what we do is we try to build it. And then we see where it can take us. The important thing about that is, back in the days you were talking about, we were living in a world of open possibilities and nobody knew what was ever going to happen, but we could try anything freely. And what's important today is that we're in a world of responsibilities, where you actually have to think very carefully about where that technology can take us, and develop it in directions that you think are going to benefit society, as opposed to ones that are necessarily not going to do that. And when I say benefit, you want that benefit to diffuse throughout all of society. But if you think about some of the things that are going on today, ever since the world went digital, things became unbelievably convenient and easy, and sort of the culmination of that was this phone, which is most people's window into the world. And I think that's a problem. Okay, because I think along with that convenience and portability, we've shrunk the window.
Right.
And there are so many things that you need to do where you just can't focus it through such a tiny
7-inch window.
A tiny window. I mean, if you just look behind you, the entire wall there is a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And it's a space that we can use to think about. So I think that as time goes on, hopefully that trend will reverse. And we'll build bigger and bigger windows. To my way of thinking, we lost a great opportunity during the pandemic with kids. We sent kids home and we took them out of the space of the classroom, and we tried to focus their learning through this. We didn't think about ways to make that bigger. Well, I think now, in retrospect, we can look forward to making it
That's
bigger.
an interesting point. So, I watched some of your talks from around year 2000. You were talking about these threshold events where, when the keyboard gets into the living room, when you have the blending of the TV and the internet, which was kind of the, very far ahead insight of basically streaming and Netflix and all these things that we have now. Is there any threshold event that you see right now that is maybe in the next 5 years or 10 years? Or what is that threshold event that you may foresee?
The reason that I thought about things as a threshold event is because what we had at the time was we had these industrial silos. And there was this siloed world of television that believed that television was something that occurred in the living room, and you leaned back and you wouldn't interact with it, but all you could do was twitch. All you could do was hit the channel button. And it was pretty clear that digital television was going to empower people in ways that went way beyond that. So the idea of a keyboard. Do you know that years and years ago, well before you were born and almost I was born, think about it, an executive wouldn't have a keyboard in their office. Right? Okay, because that was a diminution of their status.
Yeah,
right?
They had like typists and
they
other...
They had typists that came in. And so like the simple thing of a keyboard is actually... the thing that's a big threshold now is machine learning and artificial intelligence, and it's one of those things you can run but you can't hide. It's sweeping through and pervading everything we do, and it's very much like the internet. It's a wide open technology, the ultimate use of which will be determined by society as much as by technology. Now, right now, we're in the position where some of the things that it can do are shockingly amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, they're shockingly amazing.
Yeah.
And they in a sense oversell what's actually really happening there. But think of it as a future partnership where an intelligent machine or a machine that has a lot of machine learning backing it up is very much like a good friend, okay? And that good friend doesn't act for you, he acts or she acts with you, okay?
It's more of an augmented intelligence as opposed to like a separate entity.
Absolutely. It's a two-way symbiotic relationship, and each one prods the other and brings out the best in the other one. And I think that as we kind of reconcile the miraculous advances that we're watching now, writing papers, making videos, doing all of these things, that we're going to gradually find an equilibrium where those two become something we do in concert. So that's going to be...
What do you see, for example, is there any insights you have into like how the AI is going to actually interact, with you in the media when you're, for example, watching a stream or watching YouTube? I mean, right now, for example, a lot of like recommendation systems are running at the sort of the back end of the website to give you, videos that you may like and things like that. But is it going to get more diffused into the stream that you're, looking at? Especially like I'm interested in like, generative AI where, you can now generate these, visuals and so on. And do you see that sort of colliding with the world of media?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever really thought of it exactly that way. The answer to that is yes, and it's probably not even going to be subtle. We worked on interactive media years and years ago, and there were a couple of problems. And one of the problems was people really weren't ready for it. Okay, they really didn't interact with what they were seeing on a screen the way they do now. Now you can't not interact. So So society certainly changed. But the other thing that's changed is the sheer amount of material that existed.
Exactly.
Okay, in those days, for example, we talked with Penn and Teller, these magicians. Okay, and we told them, okay, we can put 500 hours of video that people can wander together. What would you think of that? And their answer was, we've worked together for 30 years and we have maybe half an hour of good material. Not 500 hours, but maybe only half an hour of good material. And you can make a living with that. But now the opposite is true. Now there's more video that's uploaded to places like YouTube than is ever watched. So the problem is now the opposite. The problem is the vast amount of data and navigating and wandering and synthesizing that data into something that you want to do.
It's a very interesting point, because I always had this vision of like automized video production even, like when there's so much recording, could AI actually like stitch out a bunch of different things together to provide you sort of the best of the best or the most interesting, parts of all these videos that are not watched or maybe something like that to present you something. I think that could be kind of interesting funnel that's all sort of driven by machine learning.
I think that's also true when it comes to the point of creation of it. Gloriana Davenport, who did the interactive cinema and storytelling work in the Media Laboratory for years, retired a few years ago, but she worked on this problem for years. And one of the things she wanted to do was, imagine you have a camcorder and you want to film your kid's birthday. Okay, then you could imagine holding this thing up and it would be whispering in your ear. You really want to make sure you get a shot of blowing out the candles. You really want to make sure you get a shot of opening the, opening the presents. And so it was suggestive. The technology to support intelligent suggestions didn't really exist. And the camera, of course, now is not really just a camera. Right. The camera is just another sensor.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a photon detector.
It's
detecting photons, one or many, and in many, many different ways. And so you can sort of readily see how, at the creation level, we can start to become better and more thoughtful about how we actually create.
Absolutely. I can totally see that, amplifying the creative aspects and also even providing some guidance to, help amateur video producers to do works that look much more pro, I guess. Now, shifting gear a little bit, what is your thought on metaverse? And what do you think about it in general?
I used to parody that back in the early days and say that I really didn't think the future was that we were going to all be orbiting Earth in our own space bubble watching some HD TV screen. And most of us here, me included, have spent our time with technologies of inclusion and technologies of expansion and technologies that allowed you to walk down the streets of Paris and enjoy the streets of Paris, perhaps augmented, perhaps not, but not to take the streets of Paris and to channel them into a tiny window or to put them into a headset. So, once again, I think the key is space. I think the key is blowing up the experience and making the experience large, but doing it in a way that is not isolating in the way that helmets are. I think that helmets have their place, and that place is very particular. Of course, you want to do remote manipulation and remote surgery in that kind of immersive environment, and perhaps even gaming. But even gaming, I think, is one of those things where space, inclusion, and bringing the environment in are important.
There's always this thought about, like, when I think about these things, is like, how much immersion do we really need, and do we need immersion for everything? There's this kind of like paradox between the world of a micro movements on a mouse where you just don't want to really have any efforts, but you want to be able to surf this virtual world, and you want everything to be just as compressed as possible, right? Just like on the 7-inch screen, if you just want to see a text message, that's totally fine. And then there's the opposite side of the world where you want to live in there and you want to have your, clothing in there. But I think that there has to be some sort of functionality context behind immersion for immersion to really make sense, Like there has to be enough of it, but maybe not too much of it.
Okay, that may well be, but I think the key way to think about is to replace that word me or I and think about it as we. Okay, so if you think about any space, that space is not going to be populated and built for one person.
That's interesting.
Okay, it's a space that's being built, that's going to be a social space. So wherever you use the word I, use the word we, and if you think about it that way, then you'll be able to position immersion as a social effect and an augmentation to what we do as people together.
That's very interesting. I never thought about it in that way. So do you see any place for cryptocurrencies and microtransactions and how they would come to this medium, not necessarily metaverse, but just general stream? Is there anything that you have in your sort of foresight that maybe public doesn't know about?
These days, it's hard to think about anything that the public doesn't know about. So I'm not sure that people don't or do know about things related to crypto. But notwithstanding the speculative bubble associated with it, there are a couple of wonderful things that the world of blockchain can bring to the world. NFTs, for example, which are basically a digital representation of provenance. Okay, they're a digital representation of ownership. We can all have a copy of the Mona Lisa, but you've got an open, transparent proof of the fact that you indeed own the real thing. Now, forget the hype, okay, and all the nonsense about somebody's tweet NFT selling for $1 million and now it's selling for $20. All of that stuff is the gyrations that will die out as the technology matures. But the fundamental technology of that kind of thing, of an open token that represents provenance, I think is a good thing. If you look at the contracts, or as other people have said, if you think about crypto not as a currency, but as a global computer, where the currency is merely your cost of using that computer, but you have this now global computer that you can use as a basis for contracts, as a basis for agreements, as a basis for social decision making and corporate decision making. I think that's a world that's going to start to grow once we get over an aversion that institutions have to that word crypto, because it's associated with things that are shady, and it's associated with speculation. But I think that's a gyration that's going to slowly die out.
It's a very interesting thing that you can actually sort of start to build more credible systems that you can have this kind of trust credit in there for infrastructure, and I think that's where you're saying that it would have value. That's great. So you have been in media for decades. As a general, do you have any general business advice for different businesses in the media where you have seen that maybe there was a lot of promise that maybe didn't pan out as well, and where have you seen that maybe it was kind of like overlooked, but it actually had a lot of potential?
I've been wrong more than I've been right about that. You know, I truly thought that the internet would bring a diversity of opinions from which it would be easy for you to synthesize a worldview. What I think a lot of us didn't understand is that there remain certain resonant ideas in society that just won't go away. For example, broadcasting.
Right.
You know, whether it's Monday Night Football or whether it's, you know, it's just a newscast, but the notion of this global or national or local campfire around which people gather is not likely to disappear. I don't know of a lot of technologies that are going to
Like
really
burst these bubbles that are like
Yeah.
around different opinions.
I don't know how that's going to play out, because so many of the decisions that go on now are really more economic than they are technical. We solved so many technical problems. We left the business people at sea as to how to pick and choose which ones they needed to explore.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was really a true pleasure.
It was a
I
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so
I love
much.
talking with you.